All right, I think it's time to go ahead and get started. Thank you all for joining our General Assembly preview, a sneak peek into the environmental legislation we expect to see in the upcoming legislative session. If you don't know me yet, I'm Nicole Vaughn, the interim executive director for the Virginia Conservation Network. And I'm really excited to welcome nearly 400 of you joining from across the state. About half of you guys are joining from the comfort of your own home, hopefully curled up with some hot coffee and maybe some slippers. We also have a bunch of people joining in watch parties gathered together across the state. So I want to take a minute to give a shout out not only to those people who are gathering together with their fellow advocates, but our network partners who are hosting them. So we have a watch party happening in Arlington, hosted by the Faith Alliance for Climate Solutions. If you guys want to give yourselves a woo-woo, now's the time. We also have folks in Charlottesville, hosted by our partners at Blue Ridge Prism and the Community Climate Collaborative. We have a watch party in Harrisonburg, hosted by the Alliance for the Shenandoah Valley. We have one in Leesburg, hosted by Loudoun Climate Project. We have one in Nokesville, hosted at a local advocate's home. Oh, there's Leesburg. Hello. We have one in Nokesville, hosted by Prince William Conservation Alliance and a local advocate's home, which is really great and generous. We have one in Reston, hosted by Northern Virginia Bird Alliance. I know downstairs, I'm streaming from Richmond, and in the basement of the Virginia Conservation Network office, we have Virginia League of Conservation Voters and Mothers Out Front hosting a watch party. Lynn Haven River Now is hosting a watch party in Virginia Beach, and Piedmont Environmental Council is hosting a watch party in Warrenton. And obviously, this isn't inclusive of every single area across the state, but we really appreciate and rely on our partners to be hosting these watch parties, because we can't on staff be able to go to every area of the state and host this, as well as put the presentations together. So thank you guys so much. We couldn't do it without you. And if any of our partners or even local advocates want to help get a watch party in your location, you can always let us know. And then for what you can expect from today, we're going to talk about, and with a focus on what we expect to see through the legislative session. We'll get a good starter of like a lay of the land, what's going on in the General Assembly building, what's going to be going on in Richmond, especially with the recent gubernatorial transition and what that means for us. We'll also have several sections talking about our efforts and legislation we expect to see for clean water, for energy. We'll have a section on data center reform, land and wildlife conservation, and finally, transportation. Our program team will be kicking those off and introducing themselves, introducing our speakers, and then taking audience questions and answers after each section. And I also just want to highlight what we're really excited for is our expert speakers that we've gathered today. And also I want to just say over the year, we're really, really appreciative of all these people who did not hesitate for a second to join us early on a Saturday morning to talk about their work. And not only are they joining us today, but these are the experts that we work with and rely on year round to make sure we're seeing environmental progress. So there are our Common Agenda briefing book authors, they're the educators in their local community, they're advocates in their communities, and they're lobbyists through the General Assembly session, and truly experts in their field, and we really appreciate everyone being here. And just for a little housekeeping, like I mentioned before, we have a lot of people joining virtually on their computers, laptops, iPads, even maybe cell phones, but then we also have people joining in a room full of advocates. So the easiest and most equitable way for everyone to submit their questions is via text. So you can text this number. It should be linked or written at the bottom of all the speaker presentation slides. Staff will receive all of your questions and be able to ask our speakers as we go. We might not be able to get to every question, so just keep that in mind and pay attention to the presentations. A lot of times our speakers will end up covering exactly what your question is, and we'll try to filter out any outstanding questions. But with that, thank you guys. I'm really excited to get started here. I'm going to pass it off to Blair to get started with our lay of the land presentation.
Absolutely. Good morning, everybody. And Nicole, forgive me, but I just saw the phone number you put up had a 212, and my slides actually have it as 214. So ignore my slides and do whatever it is that Nicole says. That's the rule. That should be the rule for everything moving forward. Can everybody see my slides? Okay. No one's yelling at me that they can't.
Yes.
So I'm gonna great. So good morning, everybody. My name is Blair St. Ledger-Olson. I am the Director of Advocacy and Campaigns with the Virginia League of Conservation Voters. And I'm gonna try my darndest to give y'all the lay of the land. And I'll just say that it's one of the biggest changes of the landscapes during my career. So this should be fun. So what we're going to cover, we're going to talk about the incoming administration, and we'll talk about as much as I can share with you. We're also going to talk about key dates. We're going to get into what the current chambers look like, or the incoming chambers look like, rather, caucus dynamics and leadership, committee breakdowns. And then we're also going to discuss what, if I have a crystal ball, I think our anticipated themes and dynamics are going to be this coming session. So let's talk about this incoming administration. Oh my goodness. 2025, the 2025 general election in November 4th was a historic election for Democrats, not just here in Virginia, but nationwide. And in Virginia, they swept all three statewide and have secured the largest majority in the House of Delegates in recent history. And I think it's worth noting that this is the first time in nearly 40 years that Democrats in the House of Delegates have held the chamber for two consecutive elections. And it really was a national rebuke on what is happening in Washington right now. The transition teams are making progress. As we can see here, we have an incredible new administration coming in, and it's some incredible firsts. This is the first female governor in Virginia history for Abigail Spanberger. Ghazala Hashmi will be the first Muslim lieutenant governor, not just in Virginia history, but in U.S. history. And Jay Jones will be the first Black attorney general in Virginia history. So these are some amazing, incredible folks coming in to Richmond. They have really, really lofty goals, and they have a mandate on affordability. We really saw Spanberger won by over 15 points. She campaigned exclusively on affordability, whether from healthcare, housing, or energy. And so they are coming in with some of our issues in mind. Now, when I said at the beginning of this that I would tell you what I could about the transition, that's because some things we know and some things we don't. The transition teams have started. They've started announcing secretariats. There were a few new appointments announced this week even, but we don't actually know who the new secretariats that are most relevant to our work are going to be yet. That's Secretary of Commerce and Secretary of Natural and Historic Resources. But hopefully we'll start to hear those names trickle out next week. And also, shout out to Josephus Allmond, who is on this call, for joining us at 6 a.m. in California. But he's one of the co-chairs of the Energy Policy Transition Team, which kicked off on Monday, that I'm thankful to be a part of. And then our Natural Resources Transition Team also kicked off on Friday, that I'm happy to be a part of. So we're working to establish what those policy platforms for the Spanberger administration might look like for the next coming years, but who our secretariats and who our directors of agencies will be definitely make up a big part of what those platforms look like. Now, I just mentioned some appointments, and I want to flag, and we'll get into this in a little bit, but and I just forgot, I'm so sorry, thank you for reminding me, an appointment that is definitely important. Katie Frazier, who is our Secretary of Ag and Forestry, and she comes from the Farm Bureau Credit Union, and she's great. So those appointments, if any of them happen to be current elected officials, those will kick off special elections. And because Ghazala Hashmi is already a senator, we're also going to have a special election there. But we'll get into that in a minute. All right, so what are some of those key dates? So session convenes on Wednesday, January 14th, and the inauguration is going to be on January 17th. Crossover will be February 18th. That's a Wednesday. And sine die, for anyone taking notes, is going to be March 14th, my birthday. So the legislative session this year will close, and that's my present. That's what I'm interpreting it as. Now let's talk about those chamber breakdowns. And I've got a lovely little asterisk by some of this count. So stay with me. The Senate currently is 21 Democrats and 19 Republicans. And the reason why I have that asterisk there is because Ghazala Hashmi stepping down from her Senate seat in order to run or in order to take her place as lieutenant governor and preside over the Senate means we do have a special Senate election. So it is anticipated that that seat will remain blue, but you never know. Special elections are wild here in Virginia. We're known for having them constantly. But in Democratic leadership right now, we have our majority leader, Senator Scott Survell, our caucus chair, Senator Mamie Locke, and our president pro tem is Senator Louise Lucas. The Republican leadership is Senator Ryan McDougal, and our caucus chair is Senator Mark Obenshain. And I've added, for the first time in recent memory, a extra bullet that says we have a Democratic lieutenant governor in incoming Ghazala Hashmi, and she can be a tiebreak if necessary. I think everyone on this call knows our Senate tends to be a little bit more moderate than our House. So having that Democratic tiebreak, and especially in an environmental and clean energy champion and someone like Ghazala Hashmi, could really come in handy. Now, for the House of Delegates, I've also got another little asterisk. And now let's talk about all of the special elections that are happening. We have a special election on Sunday, this coming Sunday, tomorrow, a firehouse primary between two House of Delegates members, Deborah Gardner and Mike Jones. They are running to replace Senator Hashmi's seat. So regardless of who wins that and replaces Senator Hashmi in a general election that would be held on January 6th against a former House of Delegate candidate who is named John Thomas instead of Josh Thomas. That's not a tongue twister at all. They will vie for that seat, but also there are potential House of Delegates members who are up for consideration for appointments. So we wouldn't be able to replace them in advance of session. So if I had a crystal ball, I would say we might be looking at more like 60 Democrats, 61 Democrats. So I'm sure I've just jinxed it, and I'm sure it'll be an absolutely different number. But we are going to have a few empty seats going into the 2026 session. But for right now, the breakdown is 64 Democrats and 36 Republicans. And our leadership is Speaker Don Scott, and our majority leader is Delegate Herring, and then our caucus chair is Kathy Tran. And on the Republican side of things, we have new leadership. Terry Kilgore did hold on to his leadership position in an internal caucus election in November, but former caucus chair Amanda Batten did not win her reelection. So she was actually replaced in the leadership structure with Delegate Scott Wyatt. And I don't have it listed here, but caucus whip for the House Republicans is also Michael Webert. Okay, so here are your House committee chairs. I'm not going to say every single one of them, but I wanted to make sure they were here for you. I've bolded the ones that are most relevant for our work. And there's a couple of people on this list who might be up for appointments. So we might see changes to this as well. But for right now, this is your good reference point on the House side. And this is the same as it was last session for what it's worth. But we definitely know and have changes on the Senate side. And that's because of Senator Hashmi's transition. So most relevant for those changes is that Senator Favola is taking over the chair of Ed and Health. And that means she had to give up Rehab and Social Services. And so Senator Van Valkenburg has taken over chairing that position. We will also likely see some changes in committee makeup based upon who replaces Senator Hashmi in the election, as well as do Senator Favola or Senator Van Valkenburg need to give up any committee membership that they have in order to have enough capacity to be chairs. Senator Van Valkenburg, for instance, might have to make that consideration as this is a new chair position for him. And I don't 100% know if Senator Bagby will maintain transportation or not. I think that's up for debate. We shall see. Okay. So what are these anticipated dynamics that I've been talking about? And again, I don't have a crystal ball, but I do pay a lot of attention, probably more attention than I should, to what all of the folks in Richmond are talking about. And we're going to see a lot of new faces, new House of Delegates members, a new governor, a new lieutenant governor, a new attorney general. And they're all going to be figuring out how they all fit together in these different puzzle pieces of Richmond here. It's going to be the largest caucus that Speaker Don Scott has had to steer, and that's going to be a difficult ship to steer. There's a lot of new, very progressive, outspoken voices that make up his caucus now that he'll have to contend with. And it will be Abigail Spanberger's very first legislative session with brand new staff, and that makes a pretty big difference in terms of how experienced you get in your first session versus your second, third, and fourth. So we should anticipate things taking a little bit longer than we normally are used to with a new administration, reviews of legislation, getting administration positions on pieces of policy to take a little bit longer, but they are rushing as quickly as they can to get staffed up. It'll be a new lieutenant governor. However, as a former member of the Senate, I have a lot of confidence in Ghazala Hashmi to step into those shoes pretty seamlessly. And we'll have a new attorney general who is also working to get staffed up, who will also be in the building as his office is directly across the street from it, who will be trying to review pieces of policy that most impact that agency, one of the largest in the Commonwealth. It's also Governor Youngkin's last budget. And if anybody was paying attention to politics yesterday, he had some words about Reggie and the Clean Economy Act. So he's not going out quietly. He's going to try to go out with a bang. So it'll be interesting to see what his outgoing budget looks like. And Budget Wednesday will be on Wednesday, December 17th, where we will see what that final budget looks like in presentation to the Joint Money Committees. And that budget is a really, really big part of what we think is going to control the dynamics in the 2026 General Assembly, because the federal government has had significant impacts on Virginia's budget, the amount of dollars coming in, Medicaid gaps in particular. And I'll talk a little bit about that on our next slide. But I couldn't not mention the fact that while the state elections are over, it's always an election year in Virginia, and we will have the 2026 elections to contend with as well. So let's dive a little bit deeper into what some of those themes look like. And I promise I'm almost done, and hopefully I'm not too far over time. We've got budget constraints. I think a lot of my colleagues on this call, as well as some of y'all paying attention in the rooms, were the week before Thanksgiving, were at the Joint Money Committee meetings because the money is not there. I don't have a cozier, cushier way to say that. We have a several $billion-dollar gap in our budget, and that's on the low end of the estimation spectrum. So the legislators are going to be looking at how to deal with that and how to make sure we have a balanced budget. There's going to be some consideration for new financial revenue options, things like casinos. I'm not taking a position in either direction. I'm just acknowledging that there's a lot of Fairfax lawmakers who want it. There could be potential revenue from a legalization bill. If folks remember 2021, we had the decriminalization bill for marijuana, but I wouldn't be surprised if we saw legalization coming around as a way to also increase tax revenue. And there's other things, maybe a millionaire's tax. Maybe we claw back the data center tax that currently costs Virginia $1 billion a year. Hint, hint, wink, wink. But there's going to be a lot of conversations about, is there money? And I have a feeling no new money is going to be a theme we hear a lot. So I just wanted to flag that. But if you're trying to get caught up on where the budgetary conversations stand on January 7th, there are regional budget hearings, and shout out to Chris Lane for texting me that. You're killing it, man. So another dynamic we're going to hear is on labor protections and right to work. And that doesn't necessarily impact our community, but it is going to be a very divisive conversation because the governor-elect came in saying she did not support repealing right to work, but the bills to repeal it have already been filed. So I would anticipate hearing and seeing firsthand some more spicy conversations about what direction Virginia is going in for that, and as well as other labor protections. The labor community played a significant role in these electoral outcomes, and so we hope to see good labor protections for folks that Governor Youngkin really abandoned. Things like prevailing wage, wage theft protections, other workforce development issues. Now, I couldn't talk about labor without talking about data centers. And I won't steal anybody's thunder, but I definitely anticipate data centers as well as solar siting to continue being big themes this coming legislative session. And we're also going to have ballot initiatives. And I wanted to talk about these ballot initiatives briefly, just to say that they lean themselves in pretty hard to partisan politics, particularly congressional redistricting. We had a special session the week before the election to pass the first round of a ballot initiative, a resolution measure to kick off a redistricting effort in Virginia, depending on what happens nationwide, to redraw our congressional districts. And it is very, very partisan. And it has resulted in some shakeups in committees that we're already anticipating on the House side based upon words that were said. We're going to see shakeup in committees anyway this coming session, pretty significant ones. But congressional redistricting is a very partisan issue. And we're definitely seeing it suck up all the oxygen in the room. Now, we do have other ballot initiatives that will be run this coming session as well. Restoration of rights, which Virginia League of Conservation Voters is supportive and involved with, the reproductive rights constitutional amendment, as well as marriage equality. They're pretty hyper-partisan issues, and they are going to make things a little tense, particularly that congressional redistricting one. So I just wanted them to be on folks' radar so that if you're seeing really, really angry committee meetings in P&E, you have a better understanding as to why you might be seeing those dynamics. Now with that, because I'm pretty sure I'm over time, I will return it to the lovely folks at VCN. But here's my contact information. If you have any questions or concerns, happy to chat anytime. And I'll be here for questions.
Yeah, and Blair, I think I wanted to flag that your slides are right with the numbers to text questions on. Mine was one with the typo. So we do have a couple of questions that already came in. So I think really quickly, we have one question about like why is the inauguration day after the beginning of the General Assembly? Is that normal? And is there any concern, like what does the General Assembly do before the administration is brought in?
Yeah, absolutely. It is normal. All of our inauguration dates are codified. So we're just following normal procedure. If you've been walking around the General Assembly building, you've seen all of the metal stands that are up there getting set up for inauguration day. That way everybody is here. We're in session. And it's not new for Virginia. So we do make it as seamless as possible. I was not a founding father or involved in the original determination of any of this. So I can't speak to necessarily why they made those decisions in the way that they did, but it is the normal operating procedure. And you won't, because you don't need, unless you break a whole lot of rules and somehow pass bills on day one through both chambers, which I don't think you could do, you don't need those folks in office. They won't be signing anything anytime soon. So it's also a good transition to make sure that you don't have a brand new staff on day one, and you've got a bit more of a cushion on that transition process.
Awesome. I think a quick one for data centers, what like secretary or agency does that fall under, if at all, neatly?
Nothing neatly. This is the state of Virginia. We don't make things easy. It would fall under multiple. So you've definitely got jobs and development that would fall under Secretary of Commerce. Then you have the VEDP, which is its own kind of little entity over cross-jurisdictional entity over here. You have natural resources, absolutely, in land and water implications that would fall under the Natural Resources Secretariat. So both Virginia Energy under Commerce and Natural DEQ under Historic and Natural Resources are the two that, immediately jump to mind. But I think the reason why we have such a big push and such a good case for why we need more state oversight on data centers is because of how many different buckets they touch, how intersectional they are in terms of our issues. So we shall see.
Awesome. And we have a bunch of questions coming in that are kind of issue specific. So I'm going to hold on those. But Blair, the last one for you it is about kind of like the timeline of redistricting decisions. Do we know that at all?
We sort of do. And when I say we sort of do, it's because it depends on the exact day that the resolution in the coming session is passed. And then Governor Spanberger would be able to call a special referendum about 90 days after. So we think end of April, early May is when we anticipate seeing that special ballot referendum. And the inside scoop is that there are conversations about whether or not the other three ballot measures should be moved up from November to that April-May date in order to kind of loop all of our ballot measures together. I don't necessarily recommend that, but they might. They don't call me and ask my perspective all the time. But The reason why we might see potentially Ghazala Hashmi, for instance, have be in her seat the first few days of session before that inauguration date is because you need a certain number of senators to get through, not just the majority. You need a certain prescribed, you need at least 20 plus a tiebreak to get through, hopefully 2021, to get through a ballot initiative, a constitutional amendment. So the timing of all of that is going to be down to the wire, but I'd expect to see that special referendum end of April, early May.
Thanks. All right, with that, Blair, thanks for kicking us off. I'm going to pass it on to our Director of Clean Water and Land Conservation, Rebecca. Nice to see you. Take it away.
Thanks, Nicole, and thank you, everybody. Good morning. So glad you're here with us. We're going to get right into it. I'm Rebecca Malpass. I am, as Nicole said, VCN's new Director of Clean Water and Land Conservation. We're going to get started with some great water topics. We have Jay Ford with us, who's going to talk about the Chesapeake Bay and flood resilience, as well as David Flores, who's going to talk about PFAS as it relates to water. And we're going to go ahead and kick it off with Jay. Feel free to get us started. And Jay, you're on mute.
Right. Can we see my slides?
Yes.
All right. Well, good morning, everybody. I love this event every year. It's really exciting. It's like a nerd's Christmas. We get to talk about all the possibilities as we head into the holiday season, and when everything is a fresh idea and we are hopeful. This, as Blair noted, there's a lot of changing dynamics in Bay and resilience worlds. That is also the case. We are, as of this Tuesday, there is a brand new Bay agreement with major revisions. They're calling it a revised Bay agreement, but that's really kind of a technical term. There are significant changes. We went from 10 outcomes to 4 outcomes, and from or 10 goals to 4 goals, and from 31 outcomes to 21 outcomes. So that revised agreement was signed on Tuesday, and that means Virginia has a whole new roadmap for Bay restoration work. And I think sometimes this flies under the radar, but for the Bay Agreement is really the invisible hand in a lot of natural resource policy in Virginia. They're the obvious things like pollution, but the Bay Agreement includes land conservation goals. It includes habitat targets for fisheries. It includes goals for how our communities are going to respond to climate change. It includes things like tree canopy and toxics and agricultural best management practices. All of these things fall under the Bay Agreement. And so it's hard to overstate the importance of what those goals are that we set there. So a real quick rundown. There's some good and there's some not so good. What we got in the Bay Agreement, given the political climate, is honestly is probably as strong as it could be. And the folks that have leaned in to make sure this got across the finish line really deserve a lot of praise for all the hard work they did. We would have liked to see more aggressive timelines. The Bay Agreement now runs through 2040. We would have liked to see a more aggressive timeline, particularly when it comes to water quality goals. We also would have liked to see strong language around climate change. And unfortunately, they have opted for the more amorphous term, changing environmental conditions. That being said, there is still a lot in here that it gives Virginia a ton of room to run, to enhance our natural resources, to achieve our water quality goals, and even with that weird term, to continue our important work in resilience and climate adaptation. So our legislative agenda in water and resilience is really going to flow from the new Bay Agreement and also looking at the previous iteration in those areas where we didn't quite hit the mark. So water quality, wetlands, tree canopy, climate adaptation, toxics policy, which David's going to talk about, and forest buffers. Those are all areas where Virginia did not meet our goals. And so we will have legislative agendas that sort of reflect that and help to address the shortcomings. So, expected legislation and budget items in pollution reduction. There's always the big three of funding our needs assessment for wastewater, stormwater, and our agricultural best management practices. The other one I would highlight this year is taking the very successful pilot program of pay for outcomes and moving that into code. What you should know about that is that program pays people for demonstrated reductions. And so most of our investments in water quality are based on modeled reductions. And what we're seeing is we need to get a higher level of assurance, and we also want to let the market drive innovation in these solutions. So pay for outcomes has been tremendously successful in its pilot form. We had $20 million in the pilot program. We got $120 million in proposals, some of which have just been really pushing the envelope for cutting edge science and ways to get at really surgical nutrient reductions, and doing so at a really good price point for the state of Virginia. Because as you heard in Blair's comments, we don't have any money. And so a big theme you're going to see in all of these programs over the next couple of years is how can you do more with less? How can you make sure that tax dollars are getting the highest rate of return for their objectives? And so getting pay for outcomes into code, we think, is really a top tier priority. Fisheries, there's going to be a lot of movement in there. We were going to be bringing the oyster stock assessment again. We hope to get this across the finish line. It is very much in line with this high increasing your rate of return. By doing an oyster stock assessment that is comprehensive of Virginia waters, we can do a better job of targeting where conservation dollars in oyster reefs should be placed, how we can get the best co-benefits between our restoration and private industry, and make sure that oysters are doing the things we want to clean up water and help provide habitat throughout the bay. Additionally, freshwater mussels is a really exciting area that we have seen some movement on in the last couple of years, but we need to see investment in order to be able to step up the hatchery capacity and get these mussels out around the state. On the policy side, we'll be working on a piece of legislation to create a fisheries climate plan. Virginia has a very reactive fisheries management structure right now. And as we know, warming waters, shifts in oxygen levels are all changing which fish are coming into the bay, which habitats can thrive and which cannot. We need to have a roadmap for how we're going to respond to these things in the future, both for environmental and economic reasons. On the resilience side, we are looking at a number of funding items. Top tier priority is getting back into RGGI as fast as we possibly can. RGGI was tremendously effective in driving emissions reductions and also dealing with the impacts of climate change by making investments in energy efficiency and community flood preparedness around the state of Virginia. Getting back in there is got to be a day one initiative for a new administration. On top of that, we are also looking to grow the Virginia Conservation Assistance Program, or VCAP. The program has been tremendously successful, and this year it is overprescribed, which is a really good problem to have because it means more people are applying for and implementing practices on their private property to help manage excess water. One of the more rapidly growing sectors in VCAP is living shorelines, and that is great news for Virginia. So we'd like to see VCAP grow from its current $4.5 million to $8 million. And the last budget item I'll mention is the resilience adaptation feasibility. RAFT. This is a group of Virginia universities that work directly with communities around the state to help them think through resilience, community resilience, and start moving along the continuum to when they can eventually start putting projects on the ground to help manage excess water in their communities. And they have yet to be funded by or supported by the state. And in the wake of federal changes, we think now is the time to bring them into the state budget. On the policy side, we have a number of changes to the Resilient Virginia Revolving Loan Fund to try and make it more accessible for localities and to bring it in line with Virginia's resilience principles, which include equity and a preference for nature-based design or green infrastructure. We are also excited about a piece of legislation to encourage the beneficial reuse of dredge material. A lot of this material is a valuable resource, and it's getting dumped on blue crabs or taken out into the ocean and just put overboard, when this could be helping communities become more resilient, helping wetlands migrate over time by giving them a little more material. We are also excited about legislation to identify wetlands corridors in Virginia, so our wetlands have a place to move in the future in the face of sea level rise. We will also have legislation on tidal wetlands protections and strengthening them, as well as codifying a habitat committee at VMRC so they can lean in a little more on resilience and climate adaptation questions. So I know doing all of the Bay and all of climate adaptation in one slide deck is difficult. So there are many other things we're going to be working on, but these are some of the items I wanted to highlight. And that is how you can reach me. I'll pass it back to Rebecca.
Thank you, Jay. I'm going to hand it over to David.
Good morning, everyone. Hopefully someone on the VCN side. Thank you, Nicole. My name is David Flores. I am the Vice President and General Counsel for Potomac Riverkeeper Network. Toxic contaminants of all kinds threaten our water resources. However, PFAS, a class of thousands of man-made chemicals, also known as forever chemicals, have for several years been at the forefront for our state lawmakers. PFAS are a multifaceted problem. Key to addressing PFAS is understanding scale of risk. Unlike other toxics, PFAS can have serious consequences for human health at exceedingly small quantities, indeed as little as 1 part per trillion. Next slide, please. PFAS, like other toxics, is a legacy contaminant. Unlike ketone or PCBs, however, not only have PFAS been manufactured for many decades, but their use has not been widely banned and remains widespread throughout the consumer economy and various industry sectors. Their utility is due to the incredibly durable carbon-fluorine bond. As a result, the chemicals are supremely resistant to degradation, even under extreme and variable environmental conditions and over very long periods of time. Just the PFAS manufactured today stand to endure over future generations. No surprise, of course, that these chemicals are eminently bioaccumulative, increasing up this food chain to potentially great levels in, for example, seafood. Because these chemicals readily move from soil to groundwater to surface waters, are emitted into the air, among other pathways, the resulting environmental contamination is widespread, and statewide DEQ monitoring data demonstrate this phenomenon. The breadth of consumer industrial products that contain PFAS ensures that the chemicals are also widespread in our homes, schools, workplaces, and communities. PFAS exposure and accumulation in our bodies is also connected to an ever-growing list of disease and disorders, various cancers, reproductive and developmental disease, thyroid, liver and kidney disease, dementia, and more. Indeed, the EPA reviewed the human health science at the time it developed one of our few federal rules for PFAS, finding that only 0 parts per trillion of PFAS in drinking water can prevent unacceptable risk to human health. EPA's enforceable rule, however, is 4 parts per trillion, or 4 drops in 20 Olympic-sized pools. Next slide, please. 2 pieces of legislation that I'll preview in a moment aim to address PFAS contamination of our wastewater sector. As this graphic shows, discharges from industrial facilities in our households to sewer collection systems and in landfill leachate also collected for treatment all contribute to PFAS contamination of treatment plants. Conventional technologies do not remove PFAS, so these chemicals remain in the treated wastewater discharged by plants directly to our streams and rivers. It is also concentrated in the residual solid waste or sewage sludge that is disposed in landfills, in smaller amounts through incineration, in a large quantity, including sludge imported from DC and Maryland, that is marketed as biosolids to Virginia farmers as a fertilizer. Next slide, please. Both of these previewed bills are focused on increasing the most basic testing, reporting, and disclosure of PFAS that Virginia regulators do not currently require of pollution permit holders. The first bill, which was patroned last session by Senator McPike and vetoed by the governor, serves to expand the number of industrial dischargers that must disclose their use of PFAS to wastewater utilities and the state. This data is incredibly important for local and state government to begin the work of controlling these sources of wastewater contamination, in turn reducing the amount of PFAS that treatment plants discharge to our waterways and the PFAS and sludge disposed in landfills and on farmlands. The second bill aims to accomplish two objectives in reforming the practice of land disposal of sludge or biosolids on Virginia's farmlands. The first is to ensure that farmers have a right to know just how much PFAS is contained in the biosolids they have agreed to put on their farms. And for those who participate in the practice, to have data on how much PFAS their soil contains. The second objective is to provide environmental regulators with the PFAS data necessary to do their jobs, to ensure, as Virginia code already requires, that land applications do not harm human health and the environment and prevent pollution of our waterways. This bill would also set interim limits on PFAS and biosolids to prevent the most contaminated materials from uncontrolled disposal on farms and spur further study to develop health-based limits and alternatives for sludge disposal. Next slide, please. And that's the sum of my presentation. You have my contact information there, and eager to field some questions if we have any. Thank you.
Thank you, David. We did have a lot of questions that did come in. Thank you all for those. For the sake of time, because I want to make sure that we're giving all of our speakers a fair shake and getting to present. So we're going to try to limit it to like one question and keep this really tight. We had a lot, Jay, come in. David, by the way, I haven't seen any PFAS specific questions, so just as a heads up. Jay, we obviously had a lot of folks asking about menhaden and shad and the fish industry's impact on the bay, and if there are any legislative priorities around that.
Sure. Silly for me to think I could get away with not putting menhaden on a slide. Yes, there'll be a number of pieces of menhaden legislation. We've been working with a couple of sponsors in the House and Senate on multiple fronts. One is sort of trying to get our arms around the reduction fishery and more responsible practices. So there'll be legislation that looks at seasonal quotas to try and make sure that we're spreading out that reduction fishery impact, as well as the requirement of observers. There will also be legislation to finally move bay-specific science on the health of the menhaden fishery. And it is our understanding there will also be legislation to temporarily pause the fishery in the Chesapeake Bay until science that is Chesapeake Bay specific can determine that it is being conducted in a safe manner. So a lot of different fronts. This is one of those. This issue doesn't fall on partisan lines. It falls on pretty wacky lines each year and is always very tumultuous. But the fact of the matter is that they are the base of the food pyramid. They are one of the most important species in the bay, and we have got to see some movement on this. We've been spinning our wheels for far too long. So we are really excited to work with the sponsors on all of those pieces of legislation.
Thanks, Jay. And actually, David, a ton of PFAS questions just came in. So again, apologies if we are not getting to your question. Lily, I'm going to kick it off to you right after this. David, if we could keep it to like 30 seconds. For PFAS, what industries are the largest contributors in Virginia?
For PFAS, in terms of the industrial sector, I'm not sure I have a good answer for that. I think the short of it is that it's indeed really widespread in manufacturing of all kinds, and there is a lot of legacy contamination at industrial sites. As far as industry sectors that actually manufacture PFAS, I'm not familiar with that. Though I will say there are a lot of different industry sectors involved in manufacturing in other aspects of the industrial economy that utilize PFAS.
Thanks, David. And again, if you have questions, these folks have put their contact information up, so please feel free to reach out to them with all of your really wonderful questions. Lillian, handing it over to you now.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. My name is Lillian Anderson, and I'm the Director of Energy Programs at Virginia Conservation Network. Super excited to have you all here with us this morning. We're going to dive into energy. As many of you know, Virginia has a roadmap for achieving a clean grid through the Virginia Clean Economy Act. And staying on that path is really going to require leaning into small-scale solar and battery storage and not expanding fossil fuel infrastructure. And so, of course, the path to a clean grid involves a myriad of other solutions, from energy efficiency to offshore wind to rejoining the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative. And there will be many more energy bills introduced this year that our partners are actively working on. So what we're covering today is by no means a comprehensive set of energy legislation expected for this session. Instead, these are two major priorities for the environmental community as we head into 2026 that wanted to lift up today. So with that, I'll turn it over to the speakers. First, we're going to hear from Josephus Allmond, staff attorney at the Southern Environmental Law Center, who's going to walk us through a package of solar and storage legislation we expect to be introduced this year. And then we'll be joined by Victoria Higgins, Virginia Director of Chesapeake Climate Action Network, who will discuss some more of the defensive work we expect will be needed to push back against new fossil fuel build-out, particularly the rush towards natural gas. So again, thank you for being here, and I'm pleased to turn it over to Josephus.
Thanks, Lillian, and it's great to be here with everyone this morning. Excited to talk about this slate of bills. A lot of them will seem familiar because we've been working on them in coalition for about a couple of years, and many of them caught vetoes from the current administration. So we could go to the next slide. The lack of distributed solar and storage at scale in Virginia is and will hinder our ability to meet our clean energy goals cost effectively. We know from modeling that we did earlier this year with a great team from University of Texas at Austin that increased amount of rooftop solar actually has a significant emissions reduction benefit because going to a high enough penetration allows the utility to rely less or even retire some of their least efficient generators. But the problem looking at our grid today is that APCO's penetration for rooftop solar is just 1% of their previous year's peak load, and for Dominion, it's still less than 3%. And then when you look at the residential storage attachment rates, it's 16% for APCO, which is good, but it's 16% of a very small penetration of rooftop solar. On the other hand, Dominion's 6% attachment rate leaves a lot to be desired. And these distributed resources are so important because the virtual power plant bill that was passed and signed into law this year is going to have Dominion begin to aggregate these things and depend on them more as a reliable resource. And so the more of these things we can get on the grid, the more can provide those critical services as a part of that program eventually. So if we go to the next slide, we can talk about some of these bills and how that will get done. First is the Distributed Generation Expansion Act. And so that was carried by Senator Van Valkenburg and Delegate Carlson last year. Increases the amount of distributed generation that the utilities need to comply with the VCEA. The version this year will be slightly updated from that version in that it will go up to 5% immediately from 1%, and also have a pretty significant increase for projects on previously developed sites. So last year's bill went from 200 megawatts to 600 megawatts, and this bill we're aiming to go to 1,000 megawatts of projects on previously developed sites like brownfields, parking lots, commercial and industrial sites. So putting relieving some pressure on some of our most valuable natural resources. There's also the Storage Expansion Act, which Delegate Sullivan and Senator Bagby carried last year. Same patrons again this year, but with some more ambitious targets for the short duration storage, especially. That modeling I mentioned earlier really showed a critical role for grid scale storage in reaching our clean energy goals and keeping the lights on for the next decade. That bill will also actually increase the amount of behind the meter storage that exists in Virginia law because the overall target of storage will be going up so much. There's also a balcony solar bill that was recommended out of the Commission on Electric Utility Regulation earlier this week. And so that's a great option for renters in apartments or condos or townhomes who don't have a roof of their own, but do have an outlet that they can plug a small system in up to 1,200 watts, which isn't going to power your whole home, but can definitely put a dent in your overall energy use. And if you imagine enough of those systems on the grid at the same time, putting some significant downward pressure on total demand. Shared solar, these programs are Virginia's versions of community solar and have been around since 2020, were slightly expanded in 2024. And there's some interest in expanding those programs even farther because these are small systems, 5 megawatts and under, that allow folks who can't go solar on their own to subscribe to them. So the APCO bill was recommended out of the Commission on Electric Utility Regulation. The Dominion bill was held off, and I think there's some negotiations to go to figure out what that number looks like. I put IRP reform on here because that's another bill from the Commission on Electric Utility Regulation, but it does something that's going to be really critical to fully optimize and get the most out of distributed generation, which is including those resources in the utilities integrated planning process. Until now, they're sort of just an afterthought that the utility tacks on to their system planning. By integrating them fully into their system planning, along with their distributed energy resource management system, the utility will get a better view on how much they can truly do to help the system. There's also pay as you save. That's a version of inclusive utility investing. And so a way to get utility investments into distributed energy resources like solar and storage and energy efficiency upgrades. If you remember, this is the bill that Senator Hashmi ran back in 2024, and was ultimately vetoed by Governor Youngkin. So excited about that bill. And then another 2024 repeat residential solar consumer protection. And so working with Solar United Neighbors on this one, trying to require a standard disclosure form for all residential solar transactions. We think this is going to be increasingly important because with the ITC going away, except for leased and PPA solar projects, we really want to make sure that that transparency is there because historically, those two types of solar contracts have lent themselves to more predatory behavior by some of the more unscrupulous solar companies. So really making sure that protections are in place as we expect more projects to be developed under a lease or PPA model. So those are the sort of suite of DG bills. I'm sure there will be more that are introduced over the session. I was focused on distributed generation today. I will say that the Commission on Electric Utility Regulation also recommended a bill out on solar standards for utility scale projects. And so creating a range within counties can sort of set their own ordinances for utility scale solar. The bill does not require counties to approve projects, and so they still have the full discretion to deny a project, but just trying to set some standardized ranges around these bigger utility scale projects. So I'll stop there and happy to answer any questions.
Thanks, Josephus. I'm going to toss it to Vic, and then we'll take questions for both of y'all. Go ahead, Victoria.
All right. Hello, virtual friends. Let me see if I can get my screen going. All right. Is everybody seeing my screen?
We do. Yes, you're good.
Okay, great. All right. So, if the rest of this event is Jay Ford's Nerds Christmas, my 5 minutes is maybe more like Blair's Nerds Halloween. In all seriousness, we are deeply concerned about both the general posture of the General Assembly towards gas and the Clean Economy Act, as well as some specific legislation that we know is coming that would seriously undermine our climate goals and further environmental injustice. And I want to start with the premise that we don't need new gas, even if the demand is as exorbitant as it's projected to be, and there is great reason for skepticism in that department. We can meet energy demand with clean resources, and in fact, we can do so in a way that is more affordable, more reliable, and more stable for ratepayers. Nonetheless, the gas industry is looking at our demand for power and thinking we just got a blank check. They've started a new coalition, you're seeing the logo on the right, to advance the narrative that natural gas is the solution to our energy crunch, that it's cheap, even that it's clean. And of course, if you look at fugitive emissions, often gas can be just as, if not more, carbon polluting than coal. So elsewhere on the right, you're seeing some relevant headlines, big new gas projects, what they see as their strategic opportunity right now, and some headwinds at the regional grid operator level that have made it even easier to get new gas online compared to resources like solar and wind. So what does the gas industry want? They want to build a whole new generation of gas infrastructure, and they want to do it quickly while energy demand is high and the regulatory environment is favorable. And they want to get out of existing and future regulation of emissions to make sure that these big projects remain profitable in the long term. So this next slide is from the Natural Gas Coalition's webpage. So you can see here we are plugging in Christmas lights and reading a book before bedtime and doing a job and caring for loved ones. So this is the narrative that's being sold to the General Assembly. And then you're also seeing who's participating, of course, seeing a lot of familiar names there. So there are a couple things that we expect to happen this legislative session. I'll just sort of briefly touch on RGGI, the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative. So RGGI caps pollution from power plants, and that cap lowers over time. It applies to all power plants over 25 megawatts in nameplate capacity. So that could be Dominion's, but it could also be a co-op like ODEX or a third party like Tenaska's. And that's important because the Clean Economy Act requires our investor-owned utilities, Dominion and APCO, to lower their emissions to zero by 2045 and 2050, respectively. It doesn't cover co-ops and it doesn't cover merchant power plants or third-party power plants. So RGGI is our tool to holistically decarbonize the power sector, at the same time, of course, creating hundreds of millions of dollars for flood resilience and low-income energy efficiency programs. It may not shock you to learn that these third-party or merchant gas plant owners do not like the idea that we're phasing out gas, and they really don't like paying to pollute in the meantime. Now that we, knock on wood, appear poised to re-enter RGGI, they would like to be exempted. Thank you very much. And also as part of the Virginia Clean Economy Act, Virginia will need to set up a new air pollution regulatory scheme from the period from 2031 to 2050. And that could look like simply adopting new RGGI regulations, or it could be establishing our own regulations. But these new regulations would apply to all 25 megawatt or greater electricity generators that are sending a certain amount of electricity to the grid, regardless of fuel type. So that could include some large waste incinerators that sell electricity that they produce when they burn trash, which is its own whole environmental justice issue. And once again, so, a regulated polluter would like to not be regulated. And I'll say, even though these, sort of relevant regulations do not exist yet, and there will be a whole process to establish the appropriate way to do that. And then finally, I don't have specifics to share on this third bullet, but I'll just say the general vibe that the legislature is exuding on the VCA is not good. We've seen both chambers leaders say we're going to need to make changes, and There are positive changes that I think we can all imagine making to the Clean Economy Act, but I suspect that's not what's insinuated. So we have some guesses as to what those undesirable changes might look like, and I won't, walk through here because this is sort of all conjecture which pieces they might pull on. But I would just be aware and be ready to let your lawmakers know that you are not in favor of any of the above changes. And there's my contact info.
Awesome. Thank you, Victoria. We are a little behind schedule and we have a ton of really fantastic questions coming in. So we're going to work on a GA preview frequently asked questions that we can share after this because we do want to make sure people get answers there. So I'll ask this to Josephus. Battery storage is kind of a newer thing that you're starting to hear a lot of the environmental community talk about and be really excited about. Could you direct us towards some more resources just to learn more on what the heck it is and why it's so important and where it can be cited?
Yeah, so I've put in the chat there a link to a page we have on our website, basically our clean energy vision document that sort of talks about the benefits of storage from an affordability perspective, from a reliability perspective, but also minimizing the amount of wasted energy from renewables. And then I just was looking this morning and saw a good article from the Dallas Federal Reserve Bank, of all people, talking about how batteries have prevented any conservation alerts in Texas, even during the winter months. And they're still calling for more batteries on their grid to help things because Texas, like Virginia, is dealing with significant load growth. So I would point to Texas and California, two states with very different regulatory environments, but that have built out a tremendous amount of battery storage over the last 5 years, and have seen great impacts on affordability and reliability.
Awesome. Thank you so much. So we're going to move into our hot topic for the day, data centers. As many of you know, Virginia is already home to the largest concentration of data centers in the world, and the industry is expected to continue to grow with the expansion of artificial intelligence. And so again, we're going to see a lot of data center reform bills this year, many of which our partners are either actively working on or will support. And so what we're lifting up today are just a few of the coalition priorities to ensuring there are guardrails in place for responsible development that we just wanted to elevate for y'all. So first, we're going to hear from Peter Anderson, the Director of State Energy Policy at Appalachian Voices, who's going to talk about data center reform from the energy perspective. And then we'll hear from Pat Calvert, the Virginia Director of Conservation at American Rivers, who is going to talk about data center reform from the water supply perspective. So Peter, you can go ahead and take it away.
Great. Thank you, Lillian. Appreciate y'all inviting me. And I'll just jump into the slides here. Can you see the slides okay? Great. Okay, well, as Lillian, with that fine introduction, yes, data centers, that's all anybody can talk about these days. Generative AI and chat GPT and so on and so forth. I'm not a technology person, as you can tell. But let's just dive right in framing up the problem here. So as folks probably have read in the headlines, data centers are already in Virginia. A lot more are planned, and they use a lot of energy, specifically electricity. So about a year ago, the Virginia General Assembly's Joint Legislative and Audit Review Commission, which is sort of the research arm of the General Assembly, published a report studying a variety of issues related to data center development in Virginia. And on the energy piece, the outlook was fairly grim. So we've got a lot of data centers online already today. But the amount that would like to be built and operating in Virginia would cause a tremendous amount of demand growth for electricity in Virginia. And as Victoria alluded to just a few moments ago, this has been the excuse of the gas industry to propose more gas-fired power plants to power all of these data centers. The utilities are struggling to keep up in building new generation resources fast enough to keep up with the projected demand. Now, projected demand is just a projection. It's everybody's best guess. So we're not, doomed to doubling our electricity or tripling our electricity demand over the next 20 years. But the JLARC report warned that that's, one of the possible outcomes. And they concluded that building enough electricity resources to meet data center demand would be extremely difficult and drive up prices for everybody. So we're concerned, of course, about the prices in the age of affordability here that we're living in, but we're also really concerned about the carbon emissions related to new energy infrastructure. So several bills have been run for the past couple of years. And again, as Lillian pointed out, this is not the full panoply of bills that have been introduced or that we're likely to see, but these are just a selection focused on the energy impacts. So first up on state oversight, Delegate Josh Thomas last year had a bill that would have had our state corporation commission, which regulates electric utilities, have some oversight power over whether or not data centers interconnect to the electricity grid. That bill did not make it last year, but Delegate Thomas is giving it another try this year, and I would expect to see a cognate in the Senate. The second bullet point here is the sales and use tax exemption. If folks aren't familiar, we have been giving data centers in Virginia a huge carrot to come to Virginia and locate here in the form of an exemption from paying sales tax. This exemption has existed since, I believe, 2010. And over the past couple of sessions, Senator Deeds and Delegate Sullivan have been attempting to add some conditions beyond the minimal conditions that exist today, but adding some clean energy requirements to qualify for this generous tax exemption that we as taxpayers are transferring wealth to the data center industry. So we're hoping to really hone in on this tool and ensure that if we're going to give a large taxpayer gift to the data center sector, they're going to have to be good neighbors and use energy that is cleaner than what is available on the grid today. So really pushing them to not use on-site gas and not drive up carbon emissions, but instead be a partner in solving for the climate crisis. And then finally, there's a new concept pending this year on load flexibility. So just to delve really quickly into energy nerd land, energy demand has peaks and valleys throughout the day. And what's really driving new carbon emissions and new costs related to the energy sector is when the peak demand goes up. We've got a lot of resources online to meet our needs for most of the hours of the day, most of the hours of the year already. We're not in a crisis mode. The crisis that folks are referring to really is meeting peak electricity demand. And so what can we do is getting data centers to participate in programs where they reduce their energy use during times of peak demand so that we can sort of flatten those peaks and not have as much strain on the whole grid. So Delegate Higgins in the House and Senator McPike in the Senate are looking to lead on that issue this year. And with that, here's my contact info. Happy to get into the weeds in the Q&A.
Thanks so much, Peter. Before we get to the full scope of data center questions, going to toss it to Pat.
Thank you very much. Are you able to see my presentation?
Yes.
Great, cool.
It's not full screen though.
Oh, let's try that again. All right, how about now?
All right, now you're good. Thanks.
Beautiful. Thanks, Lillian. Good morning. I'm Pat Calvert, State Director for Virginia at American Rivers, where we protect rivers, restore damaged rivers, and conserve clean water for people and nature. I'm going to move right through because I know we're a little behind, so I'm going to plow through. Holler at me if you need to, Lillian. So thanks to 2020 legislation from Delegate Carr, the General Assembly supported a requirement that every Virginia city, county, and town participate in cross-jurisdictional coordinated water resource planning to develop and submit a jointly produced regional water supply plan. Those are due in October of 2029. Localities have already begun and are amid the important work to review and understand those requirements, convene relevant stakeholders, shape the necessary tasks towards completion, and forthcoming work will include resource mapping, data gathering, assessing risks, and devising solutions, stakeholder community engagement, plan development, a lot of stuff with all the local governing bodies. There's a significant need for funding to support these continuing planning activities. Bear with me, we're getting there. It does connect to data centers. So with 70 million square feet currently in operation and more than 300 million feet of additional planned facilities, Virginia has more data centers in operation and planned than anywhere else on the globe. Data centers are hot, thirsty facilities, primarily for industrial cooling purposes. Data centers can use tremendous amounts of water, up to hundreds of thousands of gallons of water per day for some facilities. Currently, many of these data centers derive their water from public drinking water supplies, which obscures the actual amounts of water that data centers are specifically using. As such, our state does not have a firm grasp on the water use by this industry statewide. This is critical information as DEQ executes the regional water supply planning that is in process. So it's common practice for data centers to use non-disclosure or confidentiality agreements to keep their planned water use hidden from the public and from most decision makers, claiming the information to be proprietary and thus shielded from disclosure under Virginia's Freedom of Information Act. Other users must report on their water use, public water supply, manufacturing, mining, commercial, institutional, livestock, fish culture, and power generation. The concealment of water use information from one of the largest industrial water users makes regional planning extremely difficult, if not impossible, and could lead to critical source water shortages. We need solutions and sunlight. Mentioned that the process has begun for the completion of the local and regional water supply plans. That costs money. There was support for funding in the past, but it's just a little bit of seed money. So in the caboose budget, or the current fiscal year's budget, there will be a request for $500,000 for initial tasks and scoping of work. And then in each year of the biennial budget, fiscal years 2027 and 2028, we'll be asking for $750,000. And that's based on $30,000 per regional planning unit per year. So that money will be going to every locality, city, county, town in Virginia. Bills and legislation. You can expect at least two vehicles to move legislation through. One, we expect water utilities to report their water allocations to data centers to Virginia's Department of Environmental Quality, allowing our state and local governments who are tasked with protecting and sustaining our water resources the full capability to both understand and to plan for sustainable water use. Delegates Shelley Simons and Senator Cannon Srinivasan will champion the requirement of water use reporting to DEQ. Very thankful for them. And then secondly, and through the leadership of Delegate Josh Thomas, we're seeking to prohibit the use of non-disclosure agreements to conceal crucial water use information from new data center developments, allowing decision makers and the public to thoroughly discern environmental impacts before a project is ever approved. And then finally, appreciate VCN partners, staff for this opportunity today. I'll yield back to you, Lillian.
Thank you so much, Pat. Good to see you on the other side of the speaker realm. So I have one question for Peter. Can you speak to the cost allocation issue on data centers paying their fair share? What's going on there?
Yeah, just a little bit. So as folks might recall, we've discussed this issue in prior to previous sessions. There were a couple of bills addressing, are data centers paying their fair share when it comes to electricity bills? A couple of bills were run last year, and actually one of those bills from Delegate Irene Shin did pass the General Assembly last year and I would say, had an influence on a pending regulatory proceeding this year for Dominion, where Dominion's rates were under review by the regulator, the SCC. And so something that happened in a decision from the SCC, a final order that was just published right before Thanksgiving, the commission approved Dominion Energy's plans to create a new separate rate class for data centers. Now, where the rubber really meets the road is, okay, but how are we dividing the pie amongst the different rate classes? Are residential customer classes paying their fair share, commercial industrial customers, and then this new data center class of customers? And so the commission also ordered Dominion to move away from its current cost allocation method in towards something that is more fair to residential customers in the future. So that won't have an immediate impact for Dominion customers today, but it is a large step in the right direction for ensuring data centers in Dominion's territory pay their fair share. And I will say, we don't have all of the solutions that we need at the policy or regulatory level today. So I think there's a good likelihood that we will continue to see more legislation on this issue in 2026.
Thanks, Peter. And then one question for Pat is, are there any good resources on the impacts of water discharge on aquatic ecosystems or cost burden on local water utilities?
Sure. Great question. As far as water utilities, they're funded through the public, typically, but the industry also pays for those. But it's mostly an issue of is there enough water? And just I think we're not necessarily saying, we know data centers are going to happen. I'm not going to stop them. That's not our goal. Our goal is just to be very clear about how much water is being used. And unfortunately, through non-disclosure agreements, we don't know how much water is actually being used by this singular industry. So what the cost burden could be, I don't know, because we don't know how much water they're using, and what's a fair amount to be shared by our localities. As far as impacts on water discharge on aquatic ecosystems, absolutely. There are many examples all over of wells being contaminated, of water shortages. When the water's primarily being used to cool, so when you pull it out in the cooling, it oftentimes just evaporates. So it's a matter of not water quality in many situations, but a matter of actual water quantity. So that's consumption. That water won't be going back to a river. It constitutes a loss of water, and a significant one. There are also concerns about if you're pulling all the fresh water out, then will salt water move up? Our agricultural industry relies on fresh water. Putting salt water or brackish water all over your fields is not good for your crops. So there's certainly concerns about water quality beyond that as well. But I would say, in short, yes.
Thank you. All right, I'm going to toss it to Rebecca to introduce land and wildlife.
Thanks, Lillian. Appreciate it. Yes, we're going to turn it over to Land and Wildlife Conservation. We have some fabulous speakers with us today, Maribel Castañeda to talk about access to the outdoors, and Ann Jerzyk, who's going to talk about preserving tree canopy. Maribel, I'm going to hand it over to you first. Take it away.
Thank you so much for having me. Hey, everybody. Good morning. My name is Maribel Castañeda. I am the manager for our Virginia Outdoors. We are a statewide coalition of over 70 members advocating for dedicated funding for our natural resources. This includes our state parks, trails, public lands, and grant programs. We want to see our natural resources funded consistently every year, and we're doing that through a bill called Virginia's Great Outdoors Act that would dedicate at least $250 million each year to grant programs and agency funding. So to highlight this issue, Virginia does not have a dedicated source of funding to support our outdoor spaces. We are one of 13 states without a dedicated funding source for land conservation. So years of underfunding has meant that our parks, trails, and public lands can't keep up with the growing demand or maintain the staff and infrastructure that people rely on. We rank near the bottom nationally in natural resource investment, And yet, according to the latest Virginia Outdoors survey, 91% of Virginians support investing to protect natural areas and open spaces. So it's time that that funding reflects that priority. Next slide, please. And so that's what Virginia's Great Outdoors Act really brings and delivers. It is a comprehensive annual dedicated funding bill that invests in protecting natural resources for future generations, building and maintaining a world-class system of public lands, and growing Virginia's outdoor recreation sector. So it's going to direct $250 million each year to protect vulnerable natural and working lands. It's going to strengthen our public lands and grow a thriving outdoor recreation economy. So first, it protects the lands and stories that define who we are. This bill supports the Virginia Land Conservation Foundation with $30 million, adds $15 million for critical land conservation grant programs from the Battlefields Fund to farmland and forest land preservation to the BIPOC Historic Preservation Fund. And it also provides $1 million for wildlife corridor grants. These investments safeguard working farms and forests, historic sites, and natural areas that are increasingly vulnerable to development pressure. Second, it improves access to the outdoors for everyone. With $70 million for state park operations, $50 million for long overdue maintenance and access improvements, and $30 million for new public lands, this bill strengthens the parks and open spaces that families rely on. It also dedicates $2.5 million to the Get Outdoors Fund and $1 million for environmental education and literacy, ensuring that kids especially can experience the benefits of nature in a time when they need it the most. And then third, it invests in a competitive outdoor recreation sector that supports jobs and local economies. So this includes $50 million for a statewide network of multi and single-use trails and $500,000 to support the Virginia Office of Outdoor Recreation, helping communities attract visitors, businesses, and talent through world-class outdoor amenities. So Virginia's Great Outdoors Act benefits people, nature, economies. It fixes and enhances the parks and trails that we love. It protects the irreplaceable landscapes we want future generations to enjoy and strengthens the growing $13.4 billion outdoor recreation sector that supports communities across the Commonwealth. This year, we are changing our funding source to a modest tax on data center operations, providing a stable funding stream without affecting Virginia families. So really appreciate your time today. I know we're running a little behind on schedule, but here is our contact information if you have any questions. Our coalition meets every second Tuesday of the month for a monthly huddle. If you're interested in learning more, feel free to reach out and join us on this path toward funding the outdoors. Thank you.
Thanks, Maribel. I'm going to turn it right over to Anne. Take it away, Anne.
Good morning, everybody. Thanks for giving me an opportunity to talk about my very favorite topic, which is trees. My name is Ann Jurczyk. I am the manager of urban restoration for Virginia for the Chesapeake Bay Foundation. So very quickly, what is canopy? If you were to stand underneath this tree and you look up, everything that is not sky is canopy. So sort of keep that in mind as we go through this presentation. Next slide. Okay. Virginia definitely needs stronger tree canopy protections. We have lost, and this is new data, we lost nearly 50,000 acres of tree canopy just in the Bay watershed. It was lost to development, meaning it's not land that is being timbered and going to regenerate. And that's in 7 years, right? From 2014 to 2021. If you want to know, like, how big is 50,000 acres? It's 80 square miles. It's tremendous. And what it's being lost to is a plethora, right? Energy, transportation, roads, data centers, housing, shopping centers, you name it. But basically, it's pretty much gone forever. And some of the reasons behind that are largely the localities have got really limited authority to manage their tree canopy for the health of their residents. For preserving canopy, only in Planning District 8 are developers able to access incentives that would enable them to be able to maintain trees on parcels that are being developed. And the amount of replacement, so let's say you've got a 1 acre lot, it's completely forested, you come in, you put in a gas station there, so that is, considered commercial, then they only have to replace 10% of the canopy that was on that 1 acre lot. So those percentages are generally pretty low, but there's a cap on those. In other words, localities can't ask for more than those percentages. We also lost in the most recent federal budget. We lost funding for 2 FTEs that are within the Department of Forestry. These folks run the Urban and Community Forestry Program, and that they also oversee all the grant applications for the Trees for Clean Water program, which is tremendous. That lets trees be planted on church properties, on municipalities. Anyway, incredibly difficult to replace those folks if we were to lose them. And then lastly, anybody who has driven up and down 95 or 64, you've seen the tremendous amount of trees that are lost to road construction. So from an expected legislation perspective, these bills will probably be heard in either House, county, cities, and towns, or state, local government. Or last year we sort of got, a strange twist of fate, and they showed up in the Ag Committee. But we would like to enable all localities to be able to provide incentives to developers so that the developer wants to preserve existing trees on a parcel when it's being developed. We need to remove the ceiling for what those tree replacement percentages are and instead establish a floor. We ideally need a budget amendment for the Department of Forestry for those 2 FTEs, but also for $4 million for the Trees for Clean Water Fund. And then lastly, for VDOT, either a bill or perhaps it's going to be handled administratively. Think of wetlands, for instance. For our wetlands program, the mantra is avoid, minimize, and then mitigate. And we really want VDOT to have a similar approach to trees. Right now, they're an afterthought, if any thought, and we'd like to change that. So here's my contact information. I just want to say one other thing, which is I lead a tree coalition call that meets monthly during the year, but also as we come up during session, we meet every 2 weeks and then weekly during session. If you want to stay abreast of sort of how these trees are moving through subcommittee and full committee, just shoot me an email, because I'd love to be able to add you to that call and just keep you abreast. So thank you so much, and I'll stop sharing.
Rebecca, you are muted.
Thank you. Thank you, Anne. Again, I just want to say we did have a lot of great questions that came in, and we will try to put together some sort of frequently asked questions sheet to circulate around after this. Maribel, I do have a question for you about the Virginia Great Outdoors Act. Does that include funding for invasive vegetation removal and anything to do with native plants as well, adding native plants?
Not directly, but it does have a lot of components in there to help fund our agencies. So supporting some of the capital investments that would support some of that work. I think getting some more support for them would be kind of one of the priorities. It doesn't call out invasive species directly, but if that person wants to get in touch with me, would love to see how we could kind of outline some future work together.
Thanks, Maribel. And sort of in that same vein, Anne, the tree canopy and the Department of Forestry and other agencies, there's a talk about they still use invasive plants, and really this effort around trying to use non-native plants. Is there a way to address that with some of these state agencies, or is that work happening, or even through legislation?
I think some of that's already happening. So a few years ago, HB 309 was passed, and that bill specifically says, remember when I said 50,000 acres were lost in the Bay watershed? They're mapping all of the state, not just the Bay watershed. Unfortunately, it's not going to be available until January or February of 26, so too late really for this General Assembly session. But one of the things that they're looking at is how much invasives are pulling down some of our older trees, particularly in urban corridors. So that's one of the things that they're looking at is just forestry health in general, but particularly in these urban areas. And I bet you, I'm not sure where this is coming from, but the Department of Forestry is really good about not planting invasives. So just wanted to put that out there and correct any misinformation.
Thanks for clarifying that, Anne. There's a lot of issues, so I'm gonna jump to Fatima and let her get going. I know we're not covering everything. There's a plethora of things that we could be covering during these sessions, but for things like that, please just stay tuned in the future. So thank you both, and I'm gonna hand it over to Fatima.
Good morning, y'all. Thanks for tuning in. I'm Fatima Kamara, Land Use and Transportation Manager at VCN. About half of Virginia's greenhouse gas emissions come from transportation. So reducing vehicle miles traveled and fossil fuel reliance are essential to meeting our climate goals. We can do that through land use, upzoning to provide closer access to needs and amenities, creating more walkable and bikeable communities in the process. We can also do this through transportation, increasing access to transit, rail, and active transportation like biking and walking. And we can make it safer to be a biker or walker by increasing bike ped infrastructure. And we can say no to highway expansion and yes to road diet as often as possible. All of this reduces our dependence on vehicle travel, but since we won't be completely vehicle-free anytime soon, we can work to make personal vehicles, transit vehicles, and commercial fleet vehicles electric vehicles everywhere we can. To talk about our opportunities for transit is our transit and rail funding expert, Danny Plogger from Virginia Transit Association. And to discuss our options for increasing vehicle electrification is our energy expert, Lena Lewis from the Nature Conservancy, I'll let Danny take it away.
Thanks, Fatima, and thanks all of the VCN staff for putting on this wonderful program. Everyone should be able to see my screen. As Fatima said, I'm Danny Plogger with the Virginia Transit Association, also Virginians for High-Speed Rail. Today is primarily discussing keeping transit moving. One of the great pieces of news from our pandemic low of nearly 50 million transit ridership has returned. We broke about 145 million last year, and we're on pace for 156 million through the first quarter of FY26. So transit ridership is not only back to pre-pandemic levels, but we are on pace to blow the pre-pandemic levels out of the water with current trends. But like everything, one of the major issues that we are facing is that cost of our transit to operate our transit systems is, and the state revenue that helps support our local transit systems are not keeping up with inflation and with the cost of tariffs. The little chart on your screen just kind of shows our goal of a 25% ratio. That means of a transit agency's entire bandwidth of expenditures. We hope that 25% will come from state resources. Another 25% will come from federal support, and the other 50% will come from local, regional, as well as fare box recovery for those that do charge fares. In FY23, we were at that average of about 26%, but due to the kind of flatlining of our state transportation revenue, you can see on the chart that the 25% ratio continues to expand. In fact, by 2031, we're anticipating that state support will only account for about less than 14% of our transit agency's overall operating expenses, which means that by that time, our transit agencies will have to make the decision to either increase fares or reinitiate fares for those that are fare free, request their local governments in very challenging budget times to increase their support substantially or cut or reduce service. And so this issue affects more than just transit. In fact, by 2030, on the road side, over half of all construction funds will have to be diverted over to maintenance, filling potholes and such. And so this is a transportation-wide issue. The good news is that transportation funding does not go through the general fund. We have 11 different dedicated funding sources on the statewide level where transportation generates its revenue and gets all of its funding. And so in terms of what we're following for legislation, there was a comprehensive bicameral bipartisan committee called SJ 28, led by Delegate Sickles and Senator Evan up in Northern Virginia. And they were looking at transit funding primarily in that Northern Virginia region for WMATA, as well as their bus companies and VRE. But they did take a more holistic approach, looking at statewide needs as well. And so we're anticipating multiple different pieces of legislation that will potentially increase both statewide as well as regional transit funding opportunities to ensure that transit continues not only to get its fair share, but get its fair share compared to the overwhelming amount of resources on the state level that go to roadways. The target is to raise about $500 million in statewide and regional transit operating and capital funds. This will be primarily about 300 to 400 million from statewide revenue sources and another 100 to 150 million through various regional initiatives. And our goal is also to divert as much of it as possible over to the Commonwealth Mass Transit Fund. Today, all of our transportation funding flows through a waterfall. So at the top, it goes down and transit gets a portion of that further down the line. And so our goal is to secure this additional revenue and have it directly sent into the Commonwealth Mass Transit Fund. And so with that, like everything, transit, we like to keep things on time, on budget. And so I will be glad to answer any questions at the end and kick it back to you, Fatima.
Thanks so much, Danny. I will pass it to Lena.
Okay, good morning. I am Lena Lewis, Energy and Climate Policy Manager with the Nature Conservancy, and I'm here to talk about electric vehicles. So to build on what Fatima and Danny already said, yes, transportation is the largest source of carbon dioxide pollution in the state. And within that, it's our personal vehicles, our cars, our pickup trucks, and our SUVs that collectively are emitting more carbon dioxide than our entire power sector in Virginia. And so really it is imperative that we continue to provide and build upon options for people to reduce their vehicle miles traveled and to be car-free when possible. But for the vehicles remaining on the road, we really do need to accelerate that transition to electric vehicles. This is not only to fight climate change, but also to reduce air pollution, especially in our high traffic areas, to improve public health. And electrifying our medium and heavy duty vehicles that are powered by diesel will really have an outsized impact on that. So we're looking at legislation that will address one of the barriers to people adopting electric vehicles, and that is expanding and building out all areas of our EV charging network. So I love this concept of representing the EV charging network with a tree as a nature lover. So the idea is that the fast chargers along our highways at our gas stations are represented by the trunk of the tree, and they are actually a relatively small part of the EV charging network. The destinations, the grocery stores, the malls, our offices are represented by the branches of the tree, and these are all public, what we can see. But it is our homes that are private, that are below the ground represented by this tree, that are the roots, the foundation of our EV charging network that are critical for people to be able to feel like they can transition to EVs. And a lot of people feel like that's what's holding them back from transitioning to EVs. From an economic perspective, being able to charge at home at residential rates means that you are charging your EV at the equivalent of $1.40 per gallon of gasoline. So there's real savings there for people to be able to do that. So we are expecting our series of bills to improve the EV charging network in Virginia. For people in multifamily housing, access to EV chargers is a real barrier. So we are expecting a bill that would allow localities the option to require EV chargers or EV charger readiness through a zoning ordinance for commercial parking lots. So that would address both the destinations in the tree and also apartment buildings, which are commercial buildings. We also expect something to address single-family housing charger readiness for new homes so that when new homes are built, when the family is ready to upgrade to an EV, it'll be cheaper for them to add an EV charger. And then something to improve all charging across the entire EV charger network is utilities planning better for electrification of transportation. Last year, Delegate Shin had a bill that we expect her to have again this year that would require better comprehensive electrification plan or transportation electrification planning. This actually has the potential to improve the grid for everybody, potentially reduce rates for all ratepayers, even those who don't have EVs, if planning is really done well for that transition to electric vehicles. And then we also expect Delegate Sullivan to put in a bill that he's had for several years, which would provide funding to help build out EV chargers in rural areas of the state. And then something that does not fit into my theme of the EV charger build out, but which is also something that would be great to have as well, is something to fill in that gap in funding for the transition for medium and heavy duty vehicles to electrification. And this is a new fund that would provide extra funding for those vehicles to be electrified from a very small fee added to delivery fees on deliveries from large companies like Amazon. So when somebody orders something or several things from such company, 25 cents would be added on to the total order, and that would start to seed this fund for those types of vehicles. So, and also one that I did not add to this, but we're hoping as well, would also be a fund that's already in existence, but does not yet have any money in it. And that would be for EV school buses. And that would hopefully allow for more types of funding to get into that fund, make it easier to get money into that. So here is my contact info and that of some of my co-authors from our briefing book on Our Common Agenda. And that's it.
Thank you so much, Lena. We have several questions come in, but as we know, we are tight on time. Danny, I'll give the question to you. If you could talk closer to the microphone, however, there were some, it was a little bit hard to hear. But the question is, if we expect to fund 25% of operating costs for transit, how much do we expect riders to support?
Generally speaking, in Virginia, riders support about 7 to 8% of the overall expenses. So our goal is to maintain at least the average of 25% of state revenue going to cover our transit operating cost. That is intended to decline to less than 14% by 2031, which means that if we do nothing this upcoming session or in the very near future, transit fares will go up quite substantially in the magnitude of probably doubling or tripling or transit agencies will have to cut service. And so those are the decisions that will have to be made on a statewide basis, given current trends of the declining impact of our state transit operating revenue sources.
Thank you. There's a lot at stake. I will pass it to Nicole.
Yeah, I want to thank everyone for joining, our speakers for taking the time in the morning, give such a great overview on all the work they're doing and what we expect to see. As we mentioned earlier, this is definitely not exhaustive. We'll see a lot more coming in. We'll be covering a lot more. We'll also be learning a lot more as we go. There's been a lot of great questions, and especially getting into some of the detail that we just don't have time to today. And I want you guys to get back to your Saturday. So I think what we'll do is, one, we'll definitely be sharing the recording of this to you all this afternoon via email, along with downloads of all of the presentation slides so you guys can review them, as well as see the contact information. And because there's so many great questions, it's really fueling what the kind of education that we need to be doing leading up to the General Assembly session. So I'll be working with our speakers to put together a fact sheet answering a lot of those questions for you guys. And for next steps, before people either go on about their day or get into the regional breakout discussions at the watch parties, I do want to flag that as we gear up for the General Assembly session, there are a lot of lobby days coming up, including the Virginia Conservation Networks. We'll have our Conservation Lobby Day February 4th, right before crossover. We will set up all of your legislator meetings for you, provide talking points, to really gear you up to talk about the issues that you care about most with your legislators. So keep an eye out for an email with the recording, the PowerPoints, and registration for Lobby Day if you're interested. Thank you all again so much, our speakers, our watch party host, and all the attendees that joined today. A good one.